Well, welcome back to another edition of Faith Talks. My name's Andrew. I'm glad you're joining us. And if you have not tuned in before and this is your very first episode, go back and watch some of the other episodes. Great men of faith, great leaders, great pastors who are essentially, without their knowledge, are mentoring me in pastoring a church. So we're loving the little conversations that we get to have. Today, I'm especially blessed to have a fantastic man of God who has been a pastor. He's an artist. He loves video. He's a family man. He is a great man of God, and I'm encouraged to have him come and chat to us. He's got a particularly great insight into what's happening in the world right now. So welcome, Enzo Maisano. Welcome,
G'day.
Enzo.
G'day. How are you, Andrew? It's a real privilege to be with you today. I've been following this for a little bit now, and you're doing a tremendous job. And I just want to say, and you probably heard it a million times, that your mum and dad have been a tremendous impact on so many lives, including us. We had them come and speak as guest speakers at one of our church camps when we were just starting out as senior pastors, and we had the whole church there. And
Yeah.
they prophesied over Helen and I, my wife, and
Yeah.
we're actually living that prophecy today, like to this
Wow.
day. And your mum and dad prophesied that we would be in ministry, but one would go into the ministry side of things and one would go into the corporate side of things, and all of that goes with that. But we'd walk together, but we'd walk in two different lanes, and that's exactly what we're doing and have done ever since. And the way God's opened up those doors, so they were tremendous impact on our lives, and really appreciate them, but really appreciate what you're doing as well. Horsham is an incredible little town, so central, and I preached there probably in 1990 something. That
Wow.
shows my age, but I was there when John Martin was there, and
Yeah.
got invited to go down. Went down as well with Pastor John Wilkinson, who's passed away now, but he was like my mentor, my senior pastor, and we went together, and then I went back. So great to be speaking with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat to you as well. It's crazy how things go around. And I came here when I was in Bible college on trek.
Mm.
When I was back at Southern Cross Bible College, we used to do these treks, and every the students would pile in a van and drive from Katoomba out right across the country. I'm not sure where the furthest one was, but I'm believing it was like up North Queensland. They got up to some of them, but we came down here, and it's a long drive. We get down and we'd run the service on a Sunday. So I remember doing that 25 years before we started here, and I had photos of of us down here. I'm like, this is incredible. We're now back here and senior pastoring, and this is our first gig. So the more people I get to chat to and glean some advice from is great. So talk to us a little bit about what it is that you're doing now, your ministry life, your family life. Talk to us a little bit through what that looks like for you.
Okay, so we've been next February would be 40 years of ministry, 40 years as a pastor. I was actually 21 and became a youth pastor at our church and got my credentials through the AOG at the time. We got called to full time ministry on one of those really special nights, and we there used to be a campground here in the eastern side of Melbourne called Beulah Heights Camp, which was owned by the movement, and the Aussies would have their camp Christmas through to January and do the overnight prayer meeting to pray in the new year, and then they'd all leave. And on January the 2nd, we'd come in, the Italians, the Wogs, and we'd all come in from Sydney and Adelaide and Brisbane, and we'd have the camp. And that particular year, 1978, we had an American guest speaker called Ezra Coppin that came to speak, and uh, he was your typical American evangelist. He had the see-through socks and the black trousers and the white shoes and the white belts and the black body shirt, and preached up a storm. And he was okay until Thursday night,
Yeah.
and we just walked into what was known as the tabernacle, and there was an incredible heavy presence of God that I've never felt
Wow.
before, and we all could feel it. There was something about that night, and there was a few hundred of us there, a few hundred people. And he began to preach, and he began to say, I'm going to pass the torch of the gospel, and God is speaking to some of you about going into full time ministry. And I was literally, I'd already planned my career. I was going to be a photographer, particularly a sports photographer.
Yep.
I could see myself going around the world and photographing the Olympics and things like that, and love photography. And as he was calling out and saying, if you're a young person, you feel God's calling you, come to the front, and I'm going to pass the torch of the gospel onto you. And I think I sat there for 10 minutes just shaking because I knew God was calling me. And eventually I just got up out of my seat, walked the sawdust trail down to the front, knelt down. There was about 35 of us there,
Yep.
and most of them have been and are still in full-time ministry, and some of them
Wow.
international ministries. So that was the start of it. And then I had to come home and tell my mum and dad that their son was not going to be going to university and getting a job and being, the pride of the Italian family. They were Christians, but they just couldn't understand why I would leave everything and go to Bible college and be a pastor. You,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be doing that. And, spent the next 3 years just, Dad found it really hard, particularly. So he kind of disowned me. He said, "You're not my son," and had to go
Wow.
through that, going through Bible college, but came out the other end and restored that relationship and became a senior pastor in my early 30s.
Yep.
And pastored the second oldest Assembly of God church in Australia, which was Oakley Assembly of God at the time.
Well, yep.
And a lot of ministries came out of there. And I to this day was the longest serving. I was there 22 years.
Wow.
And then we gave the church to Enjoy Church to become the East Campus, Pastor Shane Baxter. And so I was with him as an associate for 3 years. And then something inside me was really restless. I was just got into my 50s and I just felt I want to be free. I had a real heart for missions. I had a real heart for using video to connect people with resources to people without resources. And I did a couple of years at Lifehouse Church up in the north, and
Yep.
eventually just took the dive and said, okay, I'm going to do the video business full time to support me to go out into the world and preach the gospel, which was the calling that I had, and God delivered me from pastoring, Pastor Andrew. And, it was interesting because the day that I finished, I got a call from a missions organization that said, we'd like you to go to Malawi and Mozambique and speak at
Wow.
our conferences, our leadership conferences, but also gather some video footage and make some videos to promote the work we're doing. And that was literally the next day or the day after. So
Wow.
since then, I've been all over the world. I've been to India a few times. I've done 4 Kingdom Builders trips with Hillsong Church, where
Yep.
we're at the moment. I've been to Malawi twice, Mozambique twice, Uganda a few times, South Africa, throughout India, throughout Thailand, throughout Nepal. I've been involved in and trying to combine ministry with video content for the work that people are doing overseas, where they need funds and they don't have the resources to put together, cinematic or high quality videos. So I use that gift and as well as the teaching gift. Philippines, I've been to 14 times,
Wow.
and just loved the people and
They're beautiful.
yeah,
I
beautiful,
was only, I
beautiful.
went there one time.
Yeah, so we did a lot of work for many years in a place called Tacloban, which was where that major storm came through and killed thousands of people. And now I'm currently doing some work with a pastor and a lot of pastors in a place called Butuan,
Yep.
which is down south in a place called Mindanao, one of the southern
Yep.
islands. Now, with the pandemic and COVID, we haven't been able to travel. So it's been very, very difficult. And I'm sure you probably found the same thing. It's like doing ministry or driving with a handbrake on.
Yeah.
The, and I've thought about it a lot that, if you were to say to me, what would be a Job experience for you, where everything was taken away, I'd say, well, don't let me go to church. Don't let me hug people. Don't let me entertain people at home. Don't let me travel because every other week I was on a plane. Don't let me go, interact with others. Lock me up in my home, and that would be pretty much it. And that's what we've experienced for 18 months.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, all I'm hanging on to is the fact that he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it.
Amen.
I don't know if I'm better, but it's definitely been a very testing time. I just there's days where, and I'm sure every pastor that might be listening to this, and you might experience this too, Pastor. Um, there's days where you're grumpy. There's days where you're angry. There's days where you're, trying to
Guilty.
be peaceful. There's days where you see things and you just shake your head and say, I don't believe this is happening to our world. And there's
Yeah.
days where you're try and just keep your head above water and just stay calm and peaceful. There's days where you feel spiritually strong and you feel like a lion, and there's days where you feel like, am I really even saved?
Yeah.
So all of those experiences, when all of the things that have been such a part. I'm a hugger. I'm Italian. I'm a talker. I love being with people. You take that away,
Yeah.
and then you go, all right, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's been a real testing time, and I'm sure I feel particularly for the itinerant pastors that have to get around and
Yeah.
haven't been able to get around. And what do? You just got to find other ways. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I've got connection to a few itinerant pastors, and a lot of them are doing stuff online.
mm,
It's just the way of things, and I think the churches are starting to understand that if you want to have a guest speaker come, particularly in Victoria right now, we
mm,
can't really meet. In
no,
regional, you can only have 20 people plus at the moment,
mm,
which is showing the timing of this so yeah, we have to get creative, and we have to, as a church and as a congregation, get used to the fact that we're going to be looking at screens even if we are in the building a fair bit. So if in Victoria we get back to the point where we can have people in the room, every likelihood is that we might not be able to have someone come from interstate or even come from Melbourne to come and speak
yeah,
for quite some time. So if we want someone to do that, and we do have some bookings to come here, then that's probably going to have to be a video, or and they'll be speaking to our church directly.
yeah, yeah,
But we have to utilize the technology that we've got, even if we can gather. And I think the important thing for the church right now is to go, okay, so however the presentation is, it's the gathering that's where the healing's going to come.
yeah.
So
I don't know how long we're going to wait till things go back to normal or whatever that looks like. I do remember stories. My parents were the exception pre-war. A whole lot of American evangelists moved through Italy and shared the gospel in a incredibly intensely Catholic country,
yeah,
and people got saved. And it was my grandfather that got saved, and then he had 7 sons and a daughter, and led many to Christ. But back in the days when the war was on and it was prohibited, they would go and have their services in caves, and they would sing their hymns by whispering so they didn't get caught. So
wow,
I sort of compare that and I go, okay, it's not so bad. But what's tough is, for me, is where people say, "Well, the church is not about meeting in a building, and we can do it online, and it's still the word of God." And no, 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 no. I think I understand that, but I don't want to accept that, because I believe there is incredible power in the gathering of
yeah,
the people. I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." Isn't there
come
for
on,
no reason? When brethren dwell together in unity, and uh, greet each other with a holy kiss. I mean, you know,
yeah.
that was the Italian part of the Bible, and we have to be together. We have to be near each other. I remember
Yeah.
last year, we've been through days and days and days of lockdowns, and we eventually came out of lockdown. And I remember being at the East Campus of Hillsong, and I was preaching that day, and there was a couple that were there, and they, young married couple, beautiful, beautiful couple, um, and I just went up to them to say hello. And as we were talking just about how things were going, I said, "Do you mind if I pray for you?" And it gets me a little bit emotional thinking about it, because it was a really special moment that reminded me of something, and I just prayed for them. And when I finished, she was crying, and she looked at me and she said, "That's why we need to meet,
Mm,
because of
exactly.
those moments." Because you can try and do that on Zoom, you can try and do it in this setting, and
Yeah,
we still do Connect Group on Zoom, and that's wonderful to see the faces, and we do communion together a lot on Zoom just to keep that connection. But there's nothing like being next to someone. There's nothing
no,
like putting your hand on someone's shoulder or giving them
yeah,
a hug. And so we need to be praying that we get back to those situations, and that everybody's welcome. We've got a major challenge at the moment where it looks like it's only going to be people that have the vaccination they'll be able to get into church. And I say, oh God, no, no, please no.
Yeah.
uh, we've never had to do that. We've never
Yeah.
had to say, or you can come in and you can't come in. uh,
Yeah.
let
And
them all
that's
come in.
and that's very much on the forefront of everyone's mind. This is probably going to be, we might have communicated a little bit further to our church by the time this airs about
Yeah.
what we've done. But just this last week, we've released a letter to our church, outlining that we're not in support of any type of segregation or discrimination within the body of Christ, whether it's on theological bounds or whether it's on vaccination status or skin color. It's just not a part of who we are as a church. So we don't know what it looks like. We're not sure yet. But time this airs, there'll be some more communication around how
Yeah.
we're going to tackle this and move forward as a community. And that's what we need to move forward together as a
Yeah.
community. Look, I don't know what the future looks like for the church. I believe that, yes, we need to gather together, but
Mm.
that may, for a period of time, look like smaller groups gathering together.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about in Italy,
Mm.
and they used to gather in caves. You think about in China, where the church had to go underground,
Yeah.
and we're not at that level of
No.
persecution.
No.
We're pretty soft. I mean, if it was really persecution, they would take down all of our internet streams. I'm not giving any suggestions
No. Well, they're
right now.
trying.
Well, yeah, some people are getting cancelled. So I don't know what it looks like, but I just know that we've got to have faith. I'm a hugger too.
Mm.
I came, into this church, and from Hillsong, it's part of the
Mm.
culture there. You'd hug,
Yeah.
and it probably was a little bit uncomfortable for some of the guys here. So they're probably okay at the moment that they're not allowed to hug or come in the
I'm sure they
in
miss
the
it though.
church. So no, but it's all good. Hey, talk to us a little bit about your video side of things, and that
Yeah.
you've been able to travel around the world. That's a real passion of
Mm.
yours, and
Mm.
something that you developed. What sparked that interest in you?
Look, I think my first trip on the mission field was in 1999. So what's that?
Yeah,
20 something years ago. And I was kind of dragged there, kicking and screaming. I didn't want to go, but I had a pastor that had a real heart for Malaysia and said, "I want you to come with me, and we're going to travel through Malaysia, and I just want you to see some things you've never seen before, and we're going to go to the remote places." And I remember going and feeling incredibly uncomfortable until uh, I think when I spoke the very first time, and it was a house meeting, and it
yeah,
was packed to the rafters, maybe 50 people in a room for 10, um, hanging on every word you're saying, and then hanging out for ministry time. Something happened.
yeah,
And then like a year or so later, as a church, we built a school in a very remote part of Kenya, and that just took off. And I remember going in the second year of that to officially do the pastoral duties and to cut the ribbon and officially announce the church was open. And by that stage, we had 160 students, and the quality of our teaching was far above the average in the community. Everything is measured. It was built at the start of a famine, or the ending of a famine. So we were providing, 3 meals a day. Everything
mhm,
was sponsored by people here. And what I did was, because I'd always had an interest in photography, um, I took a little video cam, and I thought I need to show our people back home on our screens, which were kind of new in church in those days. You had the pull down screens. Um, I need to show them what we're doing here. So I got a bunch of footage and um, learned how to use an editing suite and put it put it together a video. And my goodness, People were crying. People were emptying out their wallets. People were saying, "How can I help? What can I do?" And it just catapulted the project. And I thought, okay, that maybe that's a gift or a calling or something that God's put on me. And so I continued to do that over the years that we had the school, and it just grew and grew and grew. And we ended up having sponsorships from America, and Virgin, the UK, was supporting the school, and it was all through a lot through the video stories that we were
Yeah.
sharing about. So we basically I felt that, maybe I can do that, and I kept doing that through church life, even when we gave our church to Enjoy, and it became the East Campus. I ran the media department and did all the video stuff and had a little team. And so coming out of full-time ministry, I thought if I could earn money for my hobby of telling stories through in corporate settings and different things like that, and put aside finance every month towards missions travel and missions work, I would be free and wouldn't have to rely on anybody to fund me, which has been the case ever since, pretty much. There's been a couple of situations where I was sponsored to go to certain places, but that was pretty much the exception. And so I would work, and then God would open up a door, and I'd find myself in Turak shooting a $5 million, $10 million home on a Friday, and then I'd be in the back blocks of India, uh, on a motorbike going 2-3 hours up to some northern little village where a missionary had put a bore water well and built education, and people had given their lives to Jesus. So, I was experiencing that every week, every not every week, every few months, every couple of months. So I still am doing that. It's been very slow, of course, with the lockdown, and haven't been able to do the work. But looking forward to heading back out there at some stage.
So, okay, that sounds awesome. The whole story, being able to do that and being able to have that creative edge into a ministry thing as well. I think there's a real change in how society is going. We need to be able to use those things to tell stories, and storytelling when it comes to the gospel and being able to present those kind of things. It's so important that we have that ability to be able to tell it in a creative way and to bring across something incredible through the power of media, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I named my company "Tell the Story,"
Yeah,
and it was because and my little tagline is because everybody has a story to tell, and I really do believe that everybody has a great story.
yeah,
And so whenever I film a house, rather than just go through the rooms, I try and interview the vendor or the architect and get the story.
yeah,
What are the memories you've built here? What's your favorite space? What does it feel like driving into this place from the city, and you live in the hills? And I try and get that story, but it wasn't just about telling the story of a corporate or, getting their branding out or what their company values are. It was also about telling the story.
yeah,
And so I had the privilege, and maybe if I just pick one of them out, but there's been
yep,
many. But there's a lady called Joan, and she used to be in one of our churches here in Melbourne, and she was working in the bank, and she had a sponsor child in India, and she went to visit that sponsor child. And while she was there, God really spoke to her about being an answer to providing water and education, because the government, they've got a class system, and if
yeah,
you're in the lower classes, they're in their constitution, you're actually called a savage. So they were nothing people, and they didn't get medical care, they didn't get clean water, they didn't get infrastructure, they didn't get roads. And so you've got these thousands of villages dotted around India that have no access to anything we have access to, no telecommunications. So they'd go down to the river, they'd get sick from drinking the water that had cow feces in it,
wow,
all sorts of diseases, and that's all they had. And so they'd take it home. And if anyone got, what do you get, diarrhea or
gastro,
gastro, you never made it to the hospital. You dehydrated along the way. If you were elderly or young, you would die. And so each of these villages, of which there's thousands, would have 10 or 15 deaths a year, sometimes more, sometimes less, just from waterborne diseases. So she saw that and she said, you know what? I wonder if we put a bore water well into one of these villages, what that would do. And so she organized the equipment, and it cost $2,500 Australian to actually put a bore water a pump system
Yeah.
in a village. It took a few months for workers to do it all, and the locals would help with that process. And then the water would flow, and it would completely transform the village. And so by the time I had got to her, she'd been doing this for 10 years. And I think she had about 70 villages that she'd provided fresh water for. And with that fresh water, it was education. And she also built a school. So to be able to go there, um, do ministry as well as film stories, sit with students, mentor students, film, and then bring that back for her to use to promote what she was doing was an incredible blessing to me.
Yeah.
I would love to go back. I think I went on 2 trips there, but I'd love to go back and to see where they're up to now. They've had intense opposition to what they're
Yeah.
doing, just simply because they're Christian. They've had they had to build a wall around their school facilities, which were incredible, to keep out bandits and
Wow.
bears, pretty much, because the bears are in the hills. Uh, but bandits and people that would come and do the students harm. So incredible story. I mean, that's just one. I mean, then you go to Mozambique, and there's other stories, and you go to the Philippines. I went to Papua New Guinea. I've been everywhere, and I'd love to keep doing that.
Yeah.
I would say to my wife, when I get back, I never feel more alive than when I'm uh, on these trips. And she would say to me, "Oh, thanks a lot," But there's certain things that come together where you feel like you're in the middle of God's plan. I mean, I've been in very dangerous situations, and I look back and I think, really the angels of God really protected me
Yeah.
and our team or whoever was with us. Pretty dangerous places, but the adrenaline of adventure, and also the uh, sometimes you'd be sitting in a room. I remember being in Kenya once, and we got to the place we were staying at 2 a.m., and there was a heavy metal door, and this thing opens up, and there's a balaclava man on the other side of this door, and
Wow.
then they open it up, and you go in. There's 7 or 8 of them there with machine guns, and they take you to the reception area, and there's an argument that breaks out with our hosts and the people there over our passports. And then I'm taken to a room. I'm tired. I'm feeling unsafe. There's mosquitoes everywhere, malaria everywhere, and I've got to try and put a mosquito net into the screw something into the ceiling, and I couldn't quite reach it. I'm on a chair on a bed trying to screw this thing in and not being able to reach, and just collapsed on the bed and said, God, what am I doing here? I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here.
Wow.
And the next day we went to the school that we had started, and it's a 4 or 5 hour journey. And the moment I walked on the school, I said, I should be here. I should be here. I should be here. So,
Yeah.
incredible adventure, and a feeling that God is working around the world. There were times where, and you might have experienced this as well, where you think, why here? Why not somewhere else? Why in the middle of nowhere? What am I doing in the middle of nowhere? Is this even making a difference? But you meet people, and you make lifelong friends, and you
Yeah.
support and send money, or just that word of encouragement or whatever it might be, and you think, no, I was meant to be there.
Yeah.
And I just want to be able to, I don't know how much longer we're going to be on this planet, but I want to make the most of it. And I feel like we're in an interrupted state at the moment. Oh man.
Yeah. But it's God's grace that graces us for those moments that
Yeah.
gives us that ability, and even if it's for the one. one, it's worth it. It's like
Yeah.
the hard work. If it's for the one person to have their life transformed in some
Yeah.
way by the gospel,
Yeah.
it's worth it. You
Well,
guys have got yep,
if I can just say this, I'm glad you said that. I was actually thinking about this this morning. You know, the story about Jesus stilling the storm is probably the most well, it's one of the famous stories that Jesus that's preached and taught about. But the story doesn't actually stop at the storm. It
yeah,
stops. You know, we've got chapter markers that were put in there for our benefit, so we can find things. The story actually continues, and the purpose of crossing to the other side was to go to a place where Jews didn't want to go, where uh,
yeah,
the worst of the worst of humanity was, and Jesus goes with his disciples in a point of danger, incredible danger, where they thought they were going to die, not for a great man, not for a noble man, but for a
that's right.
demon possessed man in a grave site, in a dark, horrible place, just to reach him.
Yeah,
And I think to myself often when I'm in these situations, when I'm sitting down and thinking, what am I doing here? I think about that story and I think it's for the one. And
yeah,
if you
absolutely.
look further on that, they that the whole situation happened with the pigs committing suicide off the side of the cliff, and then the people from the village coming. And you would think they would see this miracle and say, "Oh, who is this man? Jesus, you're welcome. Come into our village. You know, there's more people that need healing." They actually sent him away.
Yeah,
So even if on our claim of what's successful, Jesus went, reaches one person, and then they say, "Get out of here, don't come back."
yeah,
And the interesting thing is, and I don't know how it's connected, but the interesting thing is, Jesus says the same thing as to his disciples another time, and he says, "Let's go to the other side." And this time he goes, and there were huge crowds that were waiting for him. So
yeah,
he told that man to go and tell the village, the towns, what the Lord had done for him. And I reckon that one person became the evangelist that went
yeah.
around. And so when Jesus came back, there were the crowds that were waiting. So we never can underestimate what our impact on that one person is. You
That's
know,
right.
I don't know if a conversation I've had might have stopped a leader from committing suicide, or or maybe not giving up on their
Yeah,
church or their marriage, or or their children have been through incredible tough times, and you've come in as a fellow dad who's been through
yeah.
hurt, with kids, and being able to help. You never know.
That's right. And you guys have had in your own family an incredible story of God's grace and redemption.
Yeah.
Talk to everybody about Chris, your son, what he's been through,
Yeah.
and how he's come through.
Well, I just want to give you the end of the story before I give you the beginning of the story. Chris is, I love him. He's my best friend, and I'm so proud of him. Chris is married to Rachel, who's the well, I have to say, uh, is she the most beautiful girl in the world? I have a daughter, so there could be competition there, but she's incredibly, incredibly beautiful and weaved into the stories of them coming together, and the amazing miracle of Chris's uh, pathway through, ice addiction, drug addiction, ruining his life to come to the other end and be now full time working for Hillsong, having gone through Bible college, working for Hillsong, having done 180TC, which is a drug and alcohol rehabilitation program that the church supports. And to look at where we are, Helen and I often talk and say, hasn't God been good to us? Because that could have been a very different story. So
Yeah,
Chris grew up in our home, pastor's home, and at church he had all the blessing of being loved and celebrated, and nothing was lacking. Everybody loved him. He had a great personality. But at school, we didn't realize, but he was being bullied at school. They
yeah,
used to play a game called Ditch Chris, and they'd
no,
try and lose Chris, and so he often wandered around at lunchtime on his own, which to this day doesn't make sense to us. He was a handsome kid. He was every time he had a birthday party, there was lots of school friends there, but obviously at school he was being treated quite badly, and you don't know what that does to a young child's psyche, and he never really talked to us about it. And
Yeah.
kids are kids are kids. But when he went to high school, he decided he was going to not be that kid that is, you know, cast out and everyone's hiding from. And the way he was going to do that is be with the popular kids. And so, having grown up in a Christian home, he's living one life. He was a drummer in our church, doing all the church things, never gave us any trouble. He's going that path, but he's also at school a very different person. He's going spending time with his friends, sleeping over for, homework reasons or whatever, and they're doing party drugs and drinking and
Yeah.
partying, and we didn't know any of that. He hid it from us really well. When he got to around age 22, he moved out of home. He had a designer job in a advertising company. He was doing incredibly well, earning six-figure salary for a kid his age was incredible. He was, I'd drive down in the city and I'd see his billboards and his advertising campaigns that he'd worked on. Big brands, Samsung,
Yeah.
fashion labels, like big brands, and I'd see his work, and I knew it was his work because he'd show me the the briefs, and he'd show me the design phases, and so I would watch this. So on one hand, he was incredibly successful, but on the other hand, that industry
Yeah.
is rife with cocaine and drug use, and he started dabbling in that. They would try and get through their all nighters and stay, alert, and the CEO would come in with cocaine. So come on, boys, come on, girls, let's go. We've got to get this brief out, this pitch out today. And
Right.
so it became something that was minimal, became something that was weekly, that became something that was every day. And
Yeah.
then, like everything, the law of diminishing returns. Eventually, he got very bored in that industry. It just felt like a machine, and he was also losing his grounding in his family, in the church. He was not coming that often, so things started falling apart, and he turned to ice. And the moment he turned to ice, we saw a difference,
Yeah.
and we
Wow.
saw something was wrong. This is about 2013, 14, 2014 actually, and he started behaving differently. We'd never had a harsh word, and then suddenly he was aggressive and abusive, and not abusive. It just lost the plot, and he was not looking after himself. He was really went from being, this fashionista to like a bum. Just he was not
Yeah. Wow.
looking after his. He would be smelly. He would not shower. He would sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. His work people were calling us. Where is he? We've got a pitch today. He's not here. So he lost everything in a short space of time. I didn't know what was going on, so I approached one of his friends. I said, can you tell me? You be honest with me. What's going on? And he opened up and he told me, look, he's on ice. He also had massive amount of fines for parking, and
Yeah. Wow.
that were, and arrest warrants for his arrest, and it was just it was the darkest time in our life, and we were supposed to be at one of the happiest times in our life. Our daughter was getting married that year, and it became like joy on one side and hell on the other. And I don't know if there's parents that are listening to this, because this happens to pastors as well and
Yeah.
leaders. We've had many conversations with people that are pastoring and in leadership that are having a similar problem. But we went through hell, and we didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to turn. And thankfully, our Connect group, which was newly formed at the time, became our lifeline. And
Yeah.
we've got some really great people, significant people in our group, ex-pastors, many of them,
Yeah.
and they stood by with us and watched the miracles happen. It took about 2 years to get him into rehab, two and a bit years. And in that time, we'd go for days where we didn't know if he was alive or dead.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
Helen had cooked dinner, and then he wouldn't show up, and she'd put it in the fridge, and then she'd sit down and cry. And what's happened to our son? What's happened to our son? And then we'd go 2 days, 3 days texting, trying to call, where is he, calling friends, see where he is, thinking we'd call the police. And then he'd show up and he'd be angry. Why are you looking for me? I was just working. I was tired. I didn't call you. You can't call me. It was just aggressive. And
Yeah.
so eventually things got really bad. And Andrew, on one day, I got a call that some people with heavy metal bars had gone to his place of work and looking for him. And so
Wow.
he was in trouble. And I got a call from one of the staff members, and I thought, oh my goodness, and they were really, really dangerous people. And they called me, and I could never really get through to my son whenever I called him, but this day I did. I
Mm.
rang and I said, this has just happened. We're in danger now, because they know where we live. And we had a massive argument on the phone. And then the next day I sat down with him and I said, is this the life you want? Because if it is, you need to go and live it. But you can't live it here. You're either going to go to rehab, or you're going to have to move out of home. And that was the toughest
Yeah.
conversation I've ever had. And I think there was a book by Dobson which was called Love Must Be Tough.
Yeah.
And we think of love as rainbows and butterflies and flowers, but sometimes love has to be just that harsh. If you really love someone, you got to tell them the truth. And that conversation was the turning point. And Chris broke down crying, and he says, all right, I'll go. And a couple of weeks later, again, a few miracles along the way. We were on a plane heading to 180TC in Sydney.
Yeah.
And it probably took about 2 or 3 months of rehabilitation for him to get his senses. He come to his senses, a little bit like the prodigal.
Yeah.
And I would go to church in Sydney. I'd be working up there, or I'd just go up to surprise him. And there's a special section at Hillsong Church where all the 180TC people fit. You probably know
Yeah.
all about. And I'd go there, and he'd come down, and he'd see me as all the boys would come in from 180TC, and his face would light up. And he'd be worshiping God with one hand and have his arm around me with the other. Whereas only a few months ago, he couldn't stand my guts.
Yeah.
I'm the cause of his problems. We're the cause of his problems. And but his life slowly turned around, and then we saw the miracles that God did. And he graduated from that. Let me just say also to parents again who have got wayward children, because I used to blame myself. I used to
Yeah.
say, maybe I spent too much time in ministry. Maybe if I had have done this, or maybe I was a bad dad. Why did I look after everybody else's kids, but I didn't win with my own son? And God spoke to me like as clear could be. And he said to me, I've got naughty children too. And it just
Wow.
it was like a weight lifted off my shoulder. And
Oh.
because the Bible is full of naughty children, of God's naughty children. And he's a perfect, perfect, perfect father.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about me. It was actually about, it wasn't about me. It was actually about Chris's choices. And as he went through rehab, one of the things that happens is they own their decision making, and they, instead of blaming everyone else, they took responsibility. And then Chris said to me, Dad, you never made me take drugs. I decided that. You
Mm.
never made me rebel you were only ever good to me. I made the choices. And so, I looked at that and I thought, thank God was walking with us. Another thing that I'd say, while Chris was going through the tough times, we had to make an agreement as a husband and wife that we would speak the same language,
Yeah.
because kids play you off against each other, especially when they're drug addicts.
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
they deny things, or they see which parent is going to get soft. And so often I'd be the tough one, and Helen would be the mum, and I don't blame her for that, because she just loves Chris so much. But we had to eventually say, we have to be on the same page. If I say this, you need to say that. And the other thing is, we changed the way we spoke. I woke up 1 January, actually the year that he went to rehab, and I woke up and I read Ezekiel 37, can these bones live?
Yeah.
And God was really asking me, do you reckon I can do a miracle here? Do you reckon I can turn this thing around? And it was the darkest time. And I said, I can't, only you know, God, which is
Yeah.
Ezekiel's response. He's looking at dead bones. He's looking at the hopelessness, darkness, clouds are low, death everywhere. Only you know, God. And he said, well, you prophesy. And God could have spoken and the whole thing changed, but he said, no, I want you to speak to this situation. So we started to speak over Chris's life. We started to remind him of the prophecies that were over his life. When he'd be asleep, dead to the world, I'd put my hand on him and I'd speak life over him. And it got darker, not lighter. But then eventually we saw the miracle that God did, um, you know, uh, bringing things back to life
It's
in
such an
Chris's life.
incredible story, Chris, and just that encouragement for parents out there who are watching this, and your children are maybe away from God, or maybe they're in trouble, or they're going
Yeah,
through a tough season. Be encouraged by that. That
yeah,
it's not a
yeah.
story; it's an account. It's a recollection of
It's
everything that
actually
happened. So
it's actually a real thing.
yeah,
I think if there's anything to hold on to, pastors and leaders out there, if you're watching this, don't be hard on yourself. I don't think it's helpful.
no,
Because the devil will try and put the guilt on you. It's all your fault. You made a mistake. And you know what? We might have done things wrong, but we're all doing our best. Yeah. Look, if I can just go back. So for all the pastors and leaders out there, you tend to blame yourself, and the devil jumps on that and says you're a terrible parent and you're just committed to the church. You don't love your children. Don't be hard on yourself. You as long as you're not neglectful of your kids, as long as you're not actually intentionally
yeah,
making mistakes or couldn't care less, then you're going to reap what you sow. But if you're doing your best, if your heart is hungering after doing the will of God and following Him, you've also got to trust that your kids are going to respond to God themselves. The bit that was missing for Chris was that he didn't have his own personal relationship with Jesus. It became real to him when he got into 180. So even though he grew up in church, even though he did all
yeah,
the churchy stuff, it was when he had an encounter with Jesus. And it was through that song that we sing, I will sing like a man with no sickness in my body. And
yeah,
Chris used to sing that at the top of his lung. I will sing like I am free because I know you love me. And I know, you know, that song is a powerful, powerful song. So
yeah,
if you're a parent, don't be hard on yourself. Trust God. If God's got naughty kids and you look at them, Abraham was naughty, he lied. Noah was naughty, he got drunk. Uh, you know, uh, David, I mean, that's well documented, and the problems
yeah.
that happened after that. Even the prophets, Jonah. I mean, look at Jonah. Just God said go that way, and he went that way. you know, uh,
And then he sucked about it.
and then he talked
Once
about it when there was a good outcome.
yeah,
I,
you think about Peter. Peter denied Christ.
Well, that story there for me is the story of today. And if I could just take a different turn on that, so thank God for where Chris is, married. They've built a house. This kid was broke. He lost his friends, lost his car, lost his relationships. God not only restored, He gave him a call, a ministry, a wife, a house, a financially stable situation, restored back to his family. God did exceedingly abundantly above what we ask or think or imagine. And I'm praying that God will do that for parents that are listening to this as well.
Yeah,
But I think in the middle of it, uh, there was a scripture as well that really spoke to us. And this could be for someone that's listening to this as well. David said, I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And so the option of despairing is there for you, whether it's the lockdown or whether it's this, your own family situation, the option of despairing is there for you. But you choose not to. You say, I
yeah,
need to not despair. I need to believe. And I think in this season that we're in, what I'm really sad about is that people have lost their belief. There's people that have literally left the faith or decided on taking a back seat, and that really saddens me. And you mentioned Peter, Pastor Andrew. I look at Peter and I look at me, but you remember the conversation he had with Jesus just before the crucifixion, and Peter was really agitated by everything that was going on, and talks of betrayal and Jesus, facing a cruel death and all this stuff, giving his life for us. And Jesus says to him, Peter, I know you're going to fail. In fact, you're going to fail not once, you're going to fail 3 times. And you're going to do it early in the piece. You're going to do it straight away. Before the cock crows 3 times, you're going to let me down. But I'm not focusing on that. I'm not focusing on where you're making a mistake. I'm not going to even, that's not what's important to me. He goes, I've prayed for you that when all this is over, when the testing, when the hard times are over, that your belief, that your faith will not fail.
Yeah.
And that's what I think in this season that we have to hang on to. It's tough. It's going to probably get tougher, but we got to hang on to our belief. I believe in Jesus. I believe that he's the Son of God. I believe that God has given us the power of the Holy Spirit. I believe that he's coming again. I believe that he's for me. I believe that he's not against me. I believe that he's making a way through the wilderness. I believe. And I think that's the thing for me in this time, is getting up every day and saying, I believe. Don't lose your belief through whatever storm you go through.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know what? That's probably a great spot for us to get toward the end of our conversation. I've got a whole bunch more that I want to talk to you through,
Yeah.
but I think we're going to have to do that whole topic. I think that next topic is just probably a whole nother episode of this in and of itself, and we might try and do that in a little bit's time. But can I just ask you, Enzo, just on the back of that story, that redemption story,
Yeah.
what you guys have been through, and the encouragement towards parents who are struggling? I know that even in our church, we've got parents who have got kids who are in a similar situation to what Chris went through. Can you pray? Can you just pray over our church? Pray for the parents in our church to be encouraged and to steadfast whatever they're facing. Can you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say to those parents, this is a major pandemic in the country towns. I've had the privilege of preaching in some of the country towns at some of the churches in the last, before we got locked down. And everywhere I went, it wasn't like 1 or 2 parents. It was many, many parents that, having heard our story, came forward.
Yeah.
The country towns, the country sporting clubs, ice addiction is rife. And I want to pray for you because, I feel where you're at. I know what you're going through. It feels like there's no end in sight. It feels like you don't know if God's even going to come through. And, I want to pray that through this communication, the Holy Spirit puts faith and hope in you, like re-energizes your belief and faith that he's the God of the impossible. And I say, if God could
Beautiful.
do it for us, we were in the worst situation. We were in a really terrible situation. I don't know if my son tells me today, Dad, I wouldn't have survived. I wouldn't have made it. I was in such a bad
Wow.
way. I wouldn't have been alive today. And that sobers me up and says, God did a miracle for us. And if he did it for us, he'll do it for you. Now, you might have to go through a journey. You might have to wait. We had to go through 2 or 3, 4 years of just waiting for God to put everything together. And sometimes it gets dark before the dawn. And I encourage you, hang in there. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I pray for not just the community in Horsham, but the surrounding areas that are linked to Horsham, that central place. I pray for all of the families that today are going through their moments of hell and despair. God, I pray that you would build into them hope and faith, that if you can do the impossible for us, you can do the impossible for them, that they would never give up, that at the right time you give them the right words, the right circumstances, the right situations, so that they would respond in a way, their children would respond in a way that will lead them to redemption. God, I pray that the enemy's plans to destroy them will be thwarted, that the very thing that the enemy is using to try and destroy them, and that is drug addiction and hopelessness, God, I pray that the very thing that the enemy is using against them, that you'll turn that around, and that they will be a shining testimony and use that weapon against the enemy, and they will lead other people into freedom. God, I thank you that I look at our son, and every day I'm grateful. God, I pray that that will
Yes,
be
Lord.
the story for many of the families
Yes, God.
in Harvest Church. And I pray, Lord, that for Pastor Andrew and Rachel and the family, Lord, that they would know also that you give them wisdom on how to help these families, because it is difficult to know what to do. I pray, Lord, that they'll that you'll wake them up at different times with the right word for the families, just to encourage them. God, you're our hope. You're our strength. You're our shield. You're our future. And God, I pray that the sun will shine again, that these families will believe that there's better days ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Enzo, for
No,
being
it's
with
been a
us today. The
privilege.
conversation has been just invaluable. Look, if you're on Instagram, why don't you go and give Enzo a follow at Hot Pasta?
Yep.
So check that out. Is there anything? Do you like? Is it about being spicy or?
That's a story. That's another story.
That's a whole nother
Pasta would
story.
obviously
Yeah,
relate back to my Italian heritage,
yeah.
but there
But
is a story behind that. We won't share it today. But if people
no,
want to reach out,
we might dive into that one. Yeah,
another time. But if people
yeah,
want
we
to
might
reach
need
out, if
to.
people actually want to, get in touch with us, if there's anything we can do, if you just need
Yeah.
someone have listened to your story and maybe give you some advice. We might not have all the answers, but we might just give you that one piece of advice that might help you with your kids. Just the best way to get me is there on Hot Pasta, or just Enzo Maisano at Facebook, on the Facebook thing. Just look me up, and then just personally message me and to say where you're from, and then I'll be able to just see what we can do to help you.
That's great. That's so gracious of you to offer to do that.
No
Thanks so much
pleasure.
for being with us today on this conversation. Bless you. And church, we'll see you Sunday.
Bless you.